1980s, a time of prosperity and new hope for the American dream.
Well, now it's all coming together. Greatness lies ahead of us.
But it was poverty emerging in the streets. The need for social change was being expressed by young people making their mark on the walls of the city. No one knew more about making a mark than the graffiti artists in New York. In the midst of a complex and sophisticated society, the cave drawing was making a comeback. Were they public announcements sponsored by the city? Or symbols of some cult? They weren't factory printed like ads. They were drawn in chalk. Someone had stood there and drawn them on the spot. Amid the drudgery of getting to work, these strange visions were wide awake, and they made an entire city wonder, where were these drawings coming from? In the middle of a new decade and a vibrant East Village art scene, Keith Haring, 21 years old.
Most of it at that time was really about having fun, and we had no idea, I don't think anyone did at that time, that what we were doing was in any way going to be important or influential or going to have some effect on all of our lives or on the lives of other people in the city.
Art was breaking out of the gallery. Signs of creative energy were out on the street. And Haring, the man behind the subway drawings, was showing us that energy, popping out everywhere around us.
I just by accident noticed the first empty black panel in the subway because I was riding the subway almost every day to go to work. And I saw this empty black panel and immediately it sort of flashed in my head that it's the perfect place to draw.
But not for the New York City Police Department. Haring was arrested for criminal mischief. But nothing could stop Haring from drawing all over the city. His images started to appear everywhere. Keith Haring was born in 1958 in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. He grew up in the 60s. In a middle-class American family, influenced by Walt Disney and his father, an amateur cartoonist. Haring was too young to take part in the political turbulence of the 60s, but that same spirit was to emerge later in his work.
Most of my, I suppose, political concerns and social concerns came from, my life experience. I mean, partly being being born in the 60s, or late 50s, and growing up in the 60s, and sort of being around the quote-unquote counterculture, but not being able to participate in it, but definitely being very affected by it, and being at the age at that time when I was, I think, most impressionable, and seeing things like the Vietnam War when I was 10 years old, and seeing race riots on television, and reading Life and Look magazine, things like that.
In 1978, he moved to New York City to study painting at the School of Visual Arts. New York, where what was considered vandalism started to look very much like real art. A feeling of the 60s revolution hung in the air. It seemed as though these graffiti artists wanted to make it happen again in the 80s.
What was interesting about this young group was that they had tremendous stamina, euphoria, and drive to recreate what they thought to be the best things or the most fun or the most innovative things to be done at that time. They had tremendous energy and vitality. They had a new message to give. They had a new vocabulary to sort of communicate to and to broaden, to rediscover and to elaborate on. The idea of behaving rather like the older artists was not acceptable to them. They weren't interested in it. It wasn't fun for them.
These young artists were following in the steps of the pop artists of the 60s, who broke through the boundaries of the conventional art world. Art could no longer be restrained by the clean white walls of the art gallery. Artists like Christo began making art on a scale too vast to be contained. Works like Running Fence stretched over 24 miles of California coastline. For Haring, the impact of Running Fence reflected Christo's desire to bring people together to create public art.
I believe very strongly that 20th century art is not a single individualistic experience.
Christo involved people in the creation of his art. Andy Warhol, the most controversial artist of his time, mass-produced his art as a comment on the increased mechanization of society. He used the familiar images of popular culture to draw a greater public into his pop art revolution.
In that way, Warhol is the father to this new generation of artists who also seek a direct engagement with the public. Certainly Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf, Basquiat all attempted to make images that were accessible and generic enough that they could be accepted by every man without any critical intervention. In some ways, they bypassed the art world establishment. They attacked the elitism that had dominated art for the last several decades by going directly to the people with images that the people could understand immediately.
Birth, death, love, war. These simple, almost primitive images appeal to a wide range of people.
The variety of people that were seeing the work brought with it a variety of responses and variety of different ideas about what the work was. And so it sort of became the perfect environment or laboratory to work out all these ideas that I was discovering.
Why would the dog be barking at the man at the Times Square station and worshipped as an idol at 14th Street? If there was a secret behind the subway drawings, it was semiotics, the theory of signs. At the School of Visual Arts, Haring studied semiotic theory and discovered that images can function like words. He uses images to create a language, like words in a sentence. The meaning of each symbol varies depending on how it is combined with other symbols.
The drawings had become almost a vocabulary. There were flying saucers, there were pyramids, things like this glowing rod that sort of was an archetypal weapon. I mean, it was anything from the sword and the stone to Darth Vader's glowing rod. It sort of had this timeless, universal kind of thing where I was trying to, I think, use things that cut through all of culture and all of history. Once I started to realize that exactly how I was communicating, I started to be much more aware of what I was communicating and really trying to sort of be more in touch with what exactly was going back and forth, and not so much just putting out abstract thoughts, but really trying to guide people to see particular things and starting to deal with more social concerns.
Haring's work was simple and bold, instantly recognizable and easy to reproduce. Inevitably, the media caught on.
I think the media has unquestionably played a role in the career of almost every artist who works in the 20th century, but certainly in the last 2 decades. And Haring's case is no different. I think he was catapulted to sort of national recognition by the media and entered the art world through the world of more public media.
Paris, London, Brazil. By 1985, his work started to spring up around the world, crossing national and social boundaries. his work became a public voice for the young generation. Haring had entered the art world through the back door of popular appeal. As he presented several one-man shows in New York at Tony Shafrazi's up-and-coming gallery, he gained increasing recognition from the art community. Then, prestigious art dealer Leo Castelli acknowledged the young artist.
Since at that time I was trying, as I'm always doing actually, to show also young people in my gallery, not always the same old classics. He seemed a wonderful candidate. He wanted it to be a great extravaganza, and it was a great extravaganza. He did huge sculptures. But the miraculous thing that he did is that he painted a frieze around the gallery. But the speed with which he did it, and the assurance, without thinking for a moment, or seemingly not thinking for a moment, was just an amazing spectacle.
With formal recognition from the art world and continuous media attention, Haring became a star.
At a certain point, it was almost like it was bigger than I was, where I was sort of almost riding it like a horse or something, or trying to guide it or steer it in a direction, but at the same time that it was taking me.
Andy Warhol became fascinated with the Haring phenomenon and befriended the young artist. In 1986, Haring followed Warhol into the world of commercial art when he was commissioned to do an advertisement for Absolute Vodka. The Absolute campaign, and others like it, offered Haring an irresistible opportunity to reach a wider audience.
I think that there's a lot of information that's really important to be passed on to people, and that if it's done in a way that's interesting or is good quality, then it makes people even more interested in the thing that they're seeing or that they're learning. A lot of my quote-unquote introduction into the commercial side of things has been totally misunderstood and misrepresented by especially by art critics or by sort of critics at large. I mean, people don't understand that there could possibly be any other motivation to do something that reaches a lot of people, or to communicate in a different way, in a new medium, in a new technique.
The mass appeal of Haring's images encouraged him to make his most ambitious step into the commercial world. In 1986, he opened a shop of his own. The Pop Shop opened in Lower Manhattan. A wide range of Haring merchandise became available to shoppers of every kind.
Yeah, I would like to get the bouncy thing with the black shirt. I like what he draws. I think it's cool.
Some critics called it a sellout.
The Pop Shop was more really a response to what was already happening in the world than it was something that was just an idea that was initiated on my part. I mean, the Pop Shop sort of grew naturally out of what the work was becoming anyway. The images had become part of the world and part of a universal culture. I had to go with that idea and let it happen, let it become part of the culture, let it become part of the mass culture, instead of sort of taking it back into the art world and hiding in the art world, which is where I was trying to break out of in the first place.
I don't think that Keith is commercial at all. I mean, in the bad sense, he's not commercial at all. Now, if he opens a store, as he did, that's part of his art. Is all kinds of things that Andy did were part of his art. I think the store itself is a work of art.
For me, one of the ultimate achievements of an artist is to push forward the boundaries of what is considered art and what is not. Andy Warhol did that, and with the Pop Shop, with his billboards, Keith Haring is doing that.
As his fame grew, Haring welcomed the chance to bring his work to even more places.
Hier de Amerikaan Keith Haring in de cafetaria op de 3e verdieping, waar hij aan een muurschildering werkt.
He mounted international exhibitions, which gave him the opportunity to travel and experience other cultures. Primitive Primitive art such as Aboriginal and African art influenced him deeply. But ultimately, Haring's dynamics and language were uniquely his own.
He's one of the few artists to have really assimilated all the accomplishments of Andy Warhol, to have used what Warhol accomplished and mixed it with his own impulses to create something that in fact was even beyond Warhol. Keith is also someone who's completely assimilated the advances of the conceptual artist, the minimal artists, and other pop artists such as Roy Lichtenstein.
Always versatile, Haring continually investigates new media and new scale. He was commissioned to build various sculptures, such as this huge piece for a children's hospital in Long Island. It was forged in a steel factory in Connecticut and assembled and unveiled at the hospital in the presence of the young patients.
I think it was very nice of whoever made that statue to dedicate it to the hospital. I think that was really nice of him. I think it stands for peace, love. Children can do whatever they want if they try hard enough. And that's all.
I think good public sculpture should function in a way that sort of works with the place where it is, and instead of sort of opposing it or sort of standing out from it, it should sort of function in harmony with the environment that it's placed in and with the community that it's placed in. And a lot of the sculptures even that I've already made were made with attention to the fact that people would sit on them or climb on them or, you know, use them to eat lunch on or to sit underneath to get shade or to, you know, so they could be sort of user-friendly.
Haring deals with the issues of today. In the mid-'80s, the disaster of crack was invading the city. Haring's work spoke to people living on the fringes of society, to children, to minorities. As Haring gained their respect, he felt the responsibility to speak out on the issues that touched their lives.
From a personal experience of a friend that had, you know, gotten involved with crack and wanted to have help and couldn't get help and went to city hospitals, city agencies, kept getting turned away over and over, I became, you know, really personally aware of how drastic the situation was at the time. And the thing that was needed most at that time was really public awareness to prevent other people from getting involved in it.
Life is fresh, yes, you better believe it. A crack is whack, no, you don't need it. Life is fresh, yes, you better believe it. A crack is whack, no, you don't need it.
Even though the social content of Haring's art is very conscious, the process is strictly intuitive.
In Keith's case, the emphasis became the line, and not knowing precisely where it was going to. So it was like opening the door to the unconscious. Whether he's drawing a small drawing, you know, for a child, or whether he's doing a major mural, the size of a building, whether it's extremely simple with a few lines or tremendously complex, both symmetry and little different information, there is no sketch, there is no preparation. It has to be started and completed completely unprepared.
You're expressing yourself, being whatever parts of yourself that is, whether that is complete accuracy or more humanly making you know, diversions, or not making everything exactly symmetrical, or everything is not going to be exactly balanced 100%, but it will still have that kind of sort of consistency that is as consistent as you are as a person.
Aware of the media attention that Haring's images attracted, in 1986, West Germany's museum at Checkpoint Charlie invited him to make a political statement on the Berlin Wall.
I went to Berlin for about 3 days when I went to do the wall, and unfortunately, as is often the case, it was very cold and almost rainy most of the time I was there. The rain sort of let up around, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and so I started painting. But when I began to paint, the East Germans were peering over the wall all the time. At first they were curious because they saw all the people sort of milling around on the western side and the press and things, so they didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But eventually, after they came out a few times and realized that what I was painting was not really derogatory or was not sort of insulting them in any way, they just decided to let me alone and sort of stayed behind the wall the rest of the time. For me, the Berlin Wall was probably one of the most successful media event things I ever did. The whole reason almost for doing the wall was more for the idea of doing it, and almost as a gesture more than it was to actually paint a wall. I mean, there's a wall that represents the dividing of East and West and this lack of freedom and the conflict that's all over the world. In some ways, although it is as a political act, it has to transcend politics and be a message to people. It's about unity, no matter in the face of whatever kind of struggle or oppression. There still has to be the power of people.
When it came to volunteer projects, Haring's favorite assignments were the ones that involved children.
In a way, it's as important to maybe communicate to one person, to one 10-year-old person that's growing up, as it is to try to make any big effect on the entire world.
He collaborated with 900 children to create a banner commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. The project began with Haring painting the giant 270-foot image, as always with no preliminary sketches or plans.
If I see that something is sort of, you know, the wrong scale or off to the side or something, it can totally change my idea of what I have to do to finish the piece and really make it work and make it work as a piece. So almost every piece is sort of an adventure or is an invention as you go.
Haring spent 3 days with children of every age and social background. He encouraged them to draw their own interpretations of liberty.
I think one of the things that attracted me to working with children the most is their honesty, really, and their degree of courage and just saying and seeing exactly what they feel.
Like Warhol, Haring broke the boundaries between high and low art, and by reaching out to the widest audience, he took the process even further.
The major issue in the art world of the next decade is very likely to be the conflict between those who prefer the traditional old-fashioned art world with a small audience, serious galleries and museums, and then the constituency, which Keith Haring is very much the leader of, wanting to expand art, expand the art impulse into department stores, onto the streets, onto clothes that people wear.
But during the 1980s, the art world moved beyond graffiti art. While dealers looked for something new, Haring seemed increasingly isolated from critical acceptance in the art world.
Keith Haring is one of the few artists who have remained committed to a populism, that he's, as I said, bypassed the art establishment, and rather than being pulled in, he's remained quite an outsider to some extent. Many of his activities are not appropriable by museums and private collectors, so that he's remained a loner.
But Haring is a survivor. At the end of 1988, he presented to the New York City art world his first exhibition at the Tony Shafrazi Gallery in nearly 2 years.
I think he's as important as Andy Warhol. And I've been a fan of his for many, many years. Andy Warhol and Keith Haring. So I think he's terrific. You know? It's very important, this movement.
I think his stuff is more in tune with the times, and I think people of all ages can kind of relate to it. And then the colors kind of come out, it's got animation and stuff like that, and people like that. It kind of makes you happy. Even if it's a serious message, at least you can still be happy about it because I think the energy vibrates from his work.
Well, you would think, to look at this respectable conservative English Dowager Duchess, that I would not like it. But I love it. He has commercialized himself tremendously, but that is the 80s. Commerce, money, yuppidom, all those things are very representative of the 80s, and he has managed, I think, to keep his artistic integrity.
Despite his tremendous success, Haring remains committed to the people.
I mean, one of the things I learned from Andy the most was sort of about generosity and about humility in a way, and sort of just watching Andy dealing with people and the way that he would deal with people that were asking him for autographs or just asking things. I mean, I think the role of an artist in any society is to be a kind of antagonist, but especially in a conservative society or in a politically oppressive society, which is increasingly more what we're living in all the time.
Keith Haring, a loner in the art world, but not to the rest of the world. Keith Haring, a stubborn optimist about life, about art, about people.
If you love life, if you appreciate life and humans, then you should be against anything that's going against life and against people. I mean, when something is that obviously wrong, you have to be against it. You know, and I think it's partly responsibility, but it's partly just a natural response to seeing something that's wrong and wanting to say something about it or do something about it.